although I want to comfort myself with the thought that probably Fred has put the best the last. My topic is about underlying philosophy and impact of the new Silk Road order. It was not too long ago when China started to rise. People were talking about how China must seek to be accepted by the world and emerge into the existing world order as a responsible power. Just a couple of decades later, many have started to talk about how China is playing an active and even leading role in creating a new world order. China's bold initiative, known as One Belt and One Road, presents a grand-scale blueprint of the future geopolitical landscape. With reference to this initiative and China's overall role in it, some people have created a new expression called the Silk Road World Order, or simply Silk World Order. It is well known that centuries ago, China had the Silk Road, that linking China and the ancient capital Xi'an westward all the way to Europe, through which commerce and cultural exchanges took place. In addition to the land route traveled by camels, China also had taken ocean voyages from its east coast to South China Sea, Indian Ocean, and all the way to Africa, bringing Chinese artifacts and culture to these regions. These were known as the Silk Roads. Now the Chinese government has announced its development strategy to revive these ancient routes. In September and October 2013, China's new president, Xi Jinping, in his visit to Central Asia and South Asia, proposed to build Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st century Maritime Silk Road. The former calls for integration and cooperation of the countries on the original Silk Road through Central Asia, West Asia, Middle East, and Europe, forming a cohesive belt through building infrastructures, increasing cultural exchange, and broadening trade. The latter is a parallel plan to foster collaboration in Southeast Asia, Oceania, and North Africa through contiguous bodies of water. Since then, China has taken numerous solid steps to implement these initiatives, including setting up a $40 billion Silk Road Fund, reviving the plan for a free trade area of Asia Pacific, and more importantly, the establishment of the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank. Set to become operational in 2016 with $100 billion initial capital, the bank will be a rival to the financial system dominated by the developed countries like the United States and Japan. There is no question about how vast the scale of the One Belt, One Road strategy is. It involves 26 countries, 4.4 billion people, which counts for 63% of the world's entire population, and roughly 1/3 of the world's economy. There is also no question that the genie is already out of the bottle with huge momentum. The AIIB plan, the bank plan, has gained support from 37 regional countries and 20 non-regional members, including some of the closest allies of the United States, such as Australia, France, Germany, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, and even the United Kingdom, despite Washington's pressure to dissuade them not to join. And there is no question that this vast and unstoppable trend is not merely an economical phenomenon. Economic development is always accompanied by other changes. With the new trend, people are waking up to the realization that the dominance of the US-led West is waning and a new world order is emerging. What is the major characteristic of this emerging new world order? Will it be just changing of the guard, or will the new order be different in substance? Although no answer can be definitive until the new order unfolds fully, based upon what we have seen, I think we can reasonably expect it to be drastically different from the old order. The main difference, as Professor Yuri Tavarovsky, he is also on our program, but I haven't seen him here yet. As he puts it, it is that the new world order is not vertical, but horizontal. Unlike the old model, which is structured on the basis of economic and military power, with the ones who have the strongest muscle at the top of the pyramid, the new world order is multilateral. It will be based upon integration and cooperation, ideally to the benefit of all involved. For example, we notice that despite the fact that China is taking a leading role in the establishment of the AIIB Bank, and it holds an overwhelming 30% of the voting share, it offered to forego veto power at the bank to ensure that no single country can dictate decision-making at the new bank. This is in stark contrast to the long-standing practice at World Bank and IMF, in which the US retains the only veto power despite holding less than 20% of the voting shares. Indeed, we find China has been so cautious that it avoids using words like the China model or Beijing consensus. They don't want to create an impression that it is creating a rival to compete with the West, or that it has a model for the rest of the world to follow. They also stayed away from terms like leadership and alliance. Instead, they prefer words like dialogue, partnership, and cooperation. It is interesting that a country tainted with the reputation of lacking democracy is advocating a trend of global democracy, while the country proud of its democracy is now haunted by the image of being hegemonic in the world. Of course, China's one belt and one road strategy is not an operation of philanthropy or charity, nor are the countries that it collaborated with simply getting a favor from China. While China has accumulated a lot of experience in building infrastructures like high-speed railways and a huge foreign fund reserve, it needs to balance its underdeveloped Western regions with the more advanced East Coast. Meanwhile, the countries in Central and West Asia, Middle East, and East Europe can use China's help to speed up their modernization process. It is logical for China to shift its focus from the East Coast toward the West. But I think there is a deeper philosophical realization behind China's move toward that direction. There are two phrases used by China's new president, Xi Jinping. One is called 命运共同体, community of shared destiny. The phrase contains the insight that the world has increasingly become a community in which we share our destiny with each other. No country can be better off by itself. If you want to live well, you must let others live well. In just 2 years since Xi stepped into China's top leadership position, he has mentioned the phrase over 60 times in various contexts, including his recent visit to the US, urging the international community to abandon the zero-sum game mentality and think in terms of our shared common destiny. The second phrase is 合作共赢, cooperation and co-prosperity. If we are a community of shared destiny, then we have no option but to cooperate with one another. There is no zero-sum game. It is either 0-0 if we fight against each other, or win-win if we cooperate. This philosophical insight is deeply rooted in the traditional Chinese culture, which the new generation of Chinese leaders have been trying to revive, as Professor Du Weiming has also mentioned that. As China's main spiritual tradition, Confucianism holds the belief that great heaven has no affections, it helps only the virtuous. Confucius advocated human heartedness, which he variously described as to love people, and to not impose on others what you don't want for yourself. He taught that exemplary persons have self-esteem but are not contentious. They socialize but do not form cliques. They seek harmony but not conformity. Confucius' major successor Mencius added to this as contrast between the way of sage kings and the way of hegemons. The way of sage kings attracts people toward them through moral influence. The way of hegemon make others submit to their forces. These Confucian teachings, if well implemented, will provide a basis for a responsible government that seeks to have a pluralistic world in which differences are not just tolerated for political correctness, but cherished for their unique contributions to the harmonious world. Very much in the same way that each and every different note in a piece of music contribute to the beautifulness of the music. Confucians are well known for their sense of seeing 天下, all under the heaven, as a community of shared destiny. Professor Tu also coined the term anthropocosmic vision to describe this 天下 vision mentality, which is in contrast with the philosophy behind the notion of nation-state. 天下 entails a sense of seeing all under the heaven as interconnected, while the notion of nation-state is based upon sharp distinction between what is mine and what is not mine. The individualistic philosophical foundation of nation-state explains the irony of the current world order, which allows one country to force a destiny on the entire world on the basis of its narrowly defined national interest. The government of such a country may be democratically elected, but its leaders are not rewarded by the system for thinking beyond pleasing their own voters, even when the rival interests of other nations are at stake. Although Confucian ideals have never been fully, perfectly followed in the history of China, it played a significant role in shaping the Chinese mind. If you ever wondered why the Chinese territory goes far beyond the Great Wall, history will tell you that it was not because the Chinese conquered these regions. To the contrary, it was largely the result of China's being invaded by the people of these regions, which consequently brought these regions into the map of China. China has never colonized any other countries. In the early 15th century, a huge fleet led by China's Admiral Zheng He took voyages across the oceans down to Southeast Asia, Indian Ocean, reaching as far as the east coast of Africa. The size of Zheng He's ships and the scale of his fleets were by far the most advanced in the world, which predated and dwarfed the voyages taken by Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus. Yet unlike the latter, which marked the beginning of the colonial era, Admiral Zheng's voyages did not result in occupying an inch of foreign land, nor enslaving a single person of the places he went. Now, one may say that Xi and his colleagues are probably more communists than Confucians. But one thing people often forget today is that inherent in communism is a global 天下 vision also. Despite the unfortunate fact that the communist movement resulted in huge disasters and oppressive regimes, the original vision of communism held by Karl Marx was to emancipate people from exploitation and oppression. The famous principle entailed in the Communist Manifesto is only in emancipating the world can the proletariat emancipating himself. It was this original vision rather than the later image of totalitarianism that inspired millions of Chinese people to join the cause of communism in the first place, including Xi Jinping's own father, one of the veterans of the communist revolution, Chinese Communist Revolution. They saw in this communist vision what the early Confucians called 大同 or grand harmony. It was Professor Bissell just mentioned the Banton conference, which Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai participated and made a great contribution to the result of the conference, and he is a communist, right? So, and then we also see that it was no surprise that the communist Chinese government did what a Confucian government would do during the 1997 to 98 financial crisis. China resisted temptation to devalue the RMB against its own immediate interest in keeping its export sectors competitive. Instead, it extended its financial support to its distressed neighboring countries. China's way of handling the return of Hong Kong through the one country, two systems policy, and China's aid to other developing countries with no strings attached also show the government's willingness to embrace plurality. If some communist leaders turn out to be narrow-minded nationalists, power-thirsty dictators, or corrupted bureaucrats, that only means that they had betrayed the real spirit of communism. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not giving an overall evaluation of communism. I'm just mentioning there are some very positive ideas in it. Now, everyone is talking about China's rising economic power and global influence. In my view, the real strength and significance of China's rise is not in its increasing economy or rapid growth of military capacity, which will one day make a strong rival to the United States. Its real strength and significance is in its reappropriation and implementation of the Confucian philosophy and the best parts of the communist idea. The reason is simple. With the Tianxia vision, the vision of the global community as a community of shared destiny, it will be able to overcome the narrowness of a typical nation state and make friends, become a leading force in the world toward a much more peaceful world order. And exactly because of this, it is able to bring prosperity to its own people. As the ancient Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu says, the sage stays behind, thus he is ahead. He puts himself outside his person, thus he is able to retain his person. Through overcoming selfishness, he attains self-fulfillment. Now, of course, I can be wrong. Anyone who has studied philosophy will know that we can never have absolute certainty on anything, not to mention about future. Someone mentioned the crystal bottle. With no such an assurance, you can take what I'm saying as a hope. I think it's probably appropriate to end this panel session with something hopeful, right? So I think we have evidence to see that the Chinese leadership is moving toward a healthy direction, and it's calling for the international community to, let me quote Xi Jinping, work together to forge a new partnership of win-win cooperation and create a community of shared future for mankind. This call is so central to Chinese government's vision that it was featured prominently as the title of Xi Jinping's recent address at the United Nations. I also see demonstrations of such a philosophy in China practice of implementation of One Belt, One Road strategy. Philosophy teaches us to maintain a reasonable degree of skepticism, but it also teaches us that doubting is not a suspension of action. It is itself an action. Reading China from a Cold War mentality can become itself an action of nurturing a Cold War. Reacting to China's rise as a threat and trying to contain China not only runs the risk of missing a historical opportunity to join the emerging world of peaceful co-prosperity, but also the risk of becoming the very force against global peaceful co-prosperity. To be or not to be, that's the question. This is a famous line in Shakespeare's Hamlet. Today, we are facing a similar situation. To survive through implementing the philosophy of horizontal win-win cooperation, or to clash and perish through holding on to the vertical pyramid model of domination. That's the question. Thank you.